Got a Servicom in an video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 3 of my Star Trek TOS timeline series of videos. In this video I'll be covering the period from 2000 AD to 2228 AD, which covers the timeline from the invention of warp drive right up to Captain Kirk's birthday. To assist viewers to verify if my timeline interpretation is correct, I provide information which can allow viewers to identify the episode the critical information is contained in. A full description of this information is found in part 1 of this video series, but this key should be adequate. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in 1966, he had a vision which remained basically consistent over the following 3 years. The animated series and early movies retained this consistency in the most part. When The Next Generation was released in 1987, Gene's vision had changed and the past needed to change in order to be consistent with this new vision. This video series will look at the original vision of Star Trek. Colonel Philip Green led a genocidal war in the 21st century on Earth. This could not be a world war and was most likely a minor country engaged in a war with another minor country on Earth. The war had to be completed by 2055 to allow for United Earth to launch the USS Valiant. I've selected 2000 as a possible date for the war, as the source does state early 21st century and probably only lasts a year. This date, of course, is a wild guess and it could certainly be later. The war would need to be short, sharp and involve minimal infrastructure damage. I would suggest the result would have been the formation of the United Earth territories involving all countries on Earth. Current Star Trek canon assumes Colonel Green was involved in killing mutated people, caused probably by World War III and the Eugenics War, and was an anti-alien in nature. The latter is unlikely, as it's very possible he was long gone before the first aliens turned up, but the former is certainly quite viable. Earth sends a probe called Nomad out in the early 2000s to search for new life forms. The diagram here says 2002. The probe was damaged and eventually merged with a powerful alien probe. As the probe was heading towards Earth, possibly, it was coming from the far side of an alien race called the Malurians, which presumably were an alien race beyond Federation space. Unless it was randomly moving around, it must have travelled at an immense distance. I suspect it did travel an immense distance, but once damaged, floated for a great period of time before merging and starting to destroy life. This may have occurred recently, otherwise we would have heard of great swaths of the galaxy being sterilized. The point is, Nomad must have had FTL drive, which means it may have used some unusual early form of FTL drive, which was not suitable for manned ships. In fact, it was the first FTL probe sent out by the humans. It is very likely this was the first FTL probe sent out by the humans. Perhaps it was a very early form of impulse drive, or something which could not be used for manned flight. The primary power system was called an AN-57 and the drive was called Magnet Oni du Dynamic Venia Pulse 16K3. The diagram has a date of 2002. It was destroyed, the probe was destroyed and floated around for a long time before merging with an alien probe of immense power, after which it started sterilizing planets. There must be an unknown, very powerful race beyond the Malurian race. The US completes the Earth-Saturn probe using a DY-300 or DY-400 class spaceship in 2009. Another interesting point to make is by the time a manned Earth-Saturn probe was launched, it would seem logical that manned missions to Mars and Jupiter would have already occurred. Bases on the Moon and Mars are equally possible. In this universe, the Earth was rapidly moving out into space, unlike in our current timeline. The atomic engines used prior were superseded in 2008 with a drive which allowed for interstellar travel. This is likely the impulse drive, which has to allow for faster-than-light travel. It's likely the first impulse engine ship was the DY-500 class spaceship, although obviously we've already spoken about Nomad probe, which probably used an early version of this impulse earlier than this. This timeline probably assumes space exploration would continue in a linear form from the moon landing. This is a total guess, but if it took 10 years to get the moon, it could take 10 years to create a base on the moon, and then land on Mars, and a further 10 years to start colonising Mars, which puts it at, let's say, 1999. By 2009, the Earth-Saturn probe, the asteroids and Jupiter had been explored, and Mars continues to grow until 2018, when impulse drive was invented. After impulse drive was developed, Mars may have declared independence. I've selected a date of 2020, but it could have been at any time up to about 2039 to allow for any potential colonising missions to leave Mars. Mars must have founded more than one colony. It's possible they may have sent ships out earlier, but 2040 is a reasonable time frame from any attempt to colonise other planets. It's possible that when Mars joined the United Earth territory, it became the first full member planet apart from Earth. Their respective colonies would now be part of the United Earth territories as well. It's possible that this was in existence prior, but only involved Earth. I suspect United Earth territories probably changed to just simply United Earth, and it became a multi-planet political unit or structure. Zefram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri was born in 2030. He was almost certainly born on Alpha Centauri, but after TOS the canon was changed so that he would be born on Earth, which I think is very unlikely based on the TOS episodes. In The City on the Edge of Forever, we discover that it's currently 1936, and Kirk says that 100 years from now a famous novelist will write a great work of literature. The novelist comes from a system called Alnitak. As this would make it 2036 and the system is about 1200 light years away, it's unlikely to be human or a member of the Federation. The USS Valiant left Earth about 2055, taking 20 years to reach the galactic edge where it was destroyed. It took this long because it used impulse drive and the distance was so great, probably about 500 or 600 light years. The year it was launched could have been as late as 2060 or as early as 2045, but 2055 is the most likely, as it probably was launched after the Earth-Mars War. I'm now going to try and make an estimate of the size of the Federation, and I must admit this is all guesswork, but if true, we could make an estimate of the size of the Federation before warp drive was first invented based on the information we have at the present moment. We know Earth had colonies on Alpha Centauri when the warp drive was invented and had sent exploration ships out as far as 400 light years away, if not more. It seems reasonable that in 2060 the size of the Earth territory was perhaps 50 light years in all directions from Earth. The key technology that Earth used to do this was impulse drive. Once Earth had invented impulse drive, which probably occurred in 2018, they would have quickly expanded in all directions. A sphere 50 light years in all directions from Earth would give the United Earth 15 systems, and I base this on system density, based on later information. At least 5 would be mining or farming systems, giving us about 10 colony systems. Now, if I'm correct and impulse drive was invented in 2018, then the Earth would have had 40 years to colonise these 10 systems. None of them would be more than a simple farming colony planet, apart from Alpha Centauri, because this probably was colonised even before impulse drive. This is a viable scenario and is actually the most likely scenario to allow Earth to fight and win a war with the Romulans in 2150. In the episode Miri, we discovered that civilization on what I call Earth 2 collapsed 300 years prior to the Enterprise visiting it, which makes it 2260 if compared with our Earth. Spock states that it was the same as Earth in 1960 when it collapsed. This is not really that important, but makes the planet more of an identical copy of our Earth. And also, the information we get from this episode also gives us our starting point for the beginning of the 5-year mission. Now, I'm not using the TOS episodes. I'm using the first edition chronology notes that states that Cochrane's invention of warp drive must have occurred 200 years before, where no man has gone before. And that suggests a date of 2061, noting that Cochrane would have been 31 that year, which is a reasonable date for the invention of warp drive. The USS Valiant, which we've already mentioned, was an early impulse drive starship which explored the edge of the galaxy, most likely the northern edge, and was caught in a magnetic storm and encountered a strange barrier, after which it was destroyed. The estimate is the Valiant was destroyed in 2061 or 2063, or most likely 2065. This episode, which is where no man has gone before, assumes this to be occurring in 2264. We know the SS Valiant used impulse drive, but this must be a type of impulse drive which allowed for faster than light travel. We're absolutely certain that impulse drive must have allowed this. The Valiant left Earth about 2055, taking 10 years to reach the galactic edge where it was destroyed. The SS Valiant may have looked like the ship in the bottom left of this screen. Levinius Five is a system which contained an alien civilization which was destroyed in 2064 by an alien single-celled creatures. It was the second of the three known civilizations which were destroyed by these creatures. Federation scientists would have conducted some investigation on this planet. It could have been reasonably close to the last system affected in this manner. It's probably located outside Federation space, probably 700 light years from Earth. The Federation may have established an outpost colony very close to support the investigation of this planet before 2264. The planet Thasus was inhabited by the alien race called Thasians. The Thasians do not have corporeal form, as they abandoned that centuries ago. This can be no later than 2064 and is probably much earlier. I know this is not part of the TOS timeline, but I cannot resist including T'Pol's birthday. In Season 3, Episode 24, Zero Hour of the Enterprise series, while talking with Trip on February the 14th, 2154, T'Pol states that she will only be 66 years old on her next birthday. This places her birth in 2088 or 2089, as measured on Earth, making her 62 or 63 years old at Broken Bow. T'Pol was born the only child of Teles, an instructor at the Vulcan Science Academy, and her never-named husband. Per Vulcan tradition, T'Pol was bonded with a Vulcan named Kos when they were only children and expected to marry as adults. The Martian colonies experienced a series of murders in 2105, which is 150 years ago. This is well before the Earth-Romulan War and just after the invention of warp drive. It's assumed these colonies were reasonably developed by this year, as why would the creature go to a sparsely populated place? The United Earth territories probably span 50 light years in all directions from Earth in 2060, so this planet was probably in the area and had 40 or 50 years to develop. Just a quick note about Martian colonies. I originally thought this meant colonies on Mars. However, when this event occurred, Mars was already a full member of the Federation. It was not a colony anymore, so this must represent colonies which Mars created. In the episode Metamorphosis, it is stated that Zefram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri, the discoverer of spacewalk, disappeared 150 years ago at the age of 87. This means this occurred in 2117. The Alpha Centauri system was almost certainly a member of the United Earth territory by 2150, much earlier. The colonies in Australia were independent 100 years after colonisation began, so I would guess 2120 would be possibly when this planet became independent and a full member of the Earth at the United Earth territories. Could be later, but my guess is 2120. There was a war between Earth and the Romulans a century ago. This is another pivotal moment in the Star Trek TOS timeline. The estimate is this war occurred about 2150 and may have lasted until 2159, so it was a very long and must have been a very major war. In the episode Wolf in the Fold, we discover an alien non-corporeal form which feeds on fear, called, among other things, Rejak. It was on Earth about 1900, so it would be interesting to determine how it got there. It claimed to have lived from the dawn of time, so may represent a very early life form. On the other hand, what would it feed on at the dawn of time? The creature murdered 10 women on Heliopos, Alpha Eridani Two, about 2156. This map here probably represents the final borders between the two territories at the end of the war, which is 2159 or 2160. The yellow dotted line represents the border at the beginning of the war. It must be noted most of the planets involved in the fighting were probably very sparsely populated. It takes time to colonise a planet, and the outer 100 light year layer had no more than 50 years to do so. Most of the territory taken by the Federation, and possibly lost at the beginning stages of the war, would have had few, if any, opposing inhabitants on them. I'd expect either side would evacuate any inhabitants if they knew an attack was coming, and if there was only a couple of hundred people on the planet, this would have been very simple and easy to do. The only wildcard is the mysterious aliens mentioned in the Balance of Terror. I'm uncertain where or what they were. My guess is the few alien races which joined the Federation when it was formed, perhaps Vulcans, Andorans and Tellarites. It's likely their involvement and impact was minimal. The Federation was formed about 2161. This was certainly in response to the Earth-Romulan War, and initially the Federation mainly consisted of human planets and perhaps the mysterious allies mentioned earlier. In the episode Journey to Babel, we learned Sarek is 102 years old, which means he was born shortly after the Federation was formed in 2161 and just before the SS Archon was destroyed at Beta 3. Sarek is retiring, which we learn is at an unusually young age for a Vulcan to retire. According to Memory Alpha, Sarek, father of Spock, was born in 2165. In Operation Annihilate, Denver, we learned that Denver was first colonised in 2164, acting as a freighting line base in the area, servicing a number of Federation mining planets. It was probably about 200 light years away from Earth. Kirk's brother Sam and his wife Aurelia migrated to this planet sometime before 2264. Theta Cygni 12 is a system which contained an alien civilization which was destroyed about 2164. It was destroyed by alien single-celled creatures and was the third of the three known civilizations which suffered this fate. This system was probably close to the other affected systems, as the alien single-celled creature would be moving between systems at sublight speed, perhaps 10 light years at the most. The date is a guess and could have been at any time between 2064 and 2260. If 2164 is correct, this occurred about the time Denver was colonised, which implied it was a significant distance from Federation space. My guess is 700 light years from Earth and 500 light years from Denver. The Federation sent a spaceship called the SS Archon to Beta 3 planet about 100 years ago, which is 2164. Which was after the Earth-Romulan War. The spaceship was destroyed by the computer on the planet called Landru. While the episode does not specifically state the ship was an Earth ship, it's reasonable to assume it was, because after all the Enterprise was tracking it and tracing it. The crew of the Archon obviously landed on the planet and were absorbed into the planet's population, which implied the inhabitants were human. This is unlikely, but they may have been human enough to look the same, but possibly not to interbreed, or possibly they could interbreed. Later we'll discover, well actually we did discover that the aliens from the planet Sargon, which is what I call it, did seed the galaxy. So perhaps these people are a result of that. This means part of the population, irrespective of whether or not these people were originally the Sargonians or whatever, it does mean that when this episode occurred, part of the population were 100% human. If we assume the starship had a crew half that of the Enterprise and more of the crew were absorbed than killed, this leaves us with a population of at least 180 from the ship. After 100 years, this could have grown to a population of more than 3,000 humans, if not much more. And that probably represents the maximum population of pure humans. However, if there was interbreeding occurring, who knows what the result was in terms of population. In a piece of the action, we discovered the Horizon was a ship which visited Sigma Iota 2 and left a book about organised crime behind, which impacted that civilization. This was 100 years ago, so I expect the technological development when the ship first arrived was about 1830 level. This would have occurred in 2165. In a piece of the action, we discovered the Prime Directive was not in effect 100 years ago in 2165. The Prime Directive was certainly not in effect before 2165. The year it came into force is unknown, but it could have been put into place as late as 2245 or even later, as the Enterprise had no issues interfering with the Organians. So as a result, I suspect that it probably came into force around about 2245. In the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, we learn of an alien planet called Cheron, which is the home of the bicoloured people. The two aliens left their planet 50,000 years ago, so whatever destroyed the civilization must have occurred far more recently, perhaps 100 years ago. Although if there are corpses, as indicated in the episode, this may have occurred more recently. I suspect this is an error and the corpses are actually the remnants of the bodies, basically skeletons. In A Taste of Armageddon, we discover the Federation sent a starship, the USS Valiant, to M&R 50 years ago, which was in 2214. We later discover that the ship was destroyed by the inhabitants of MNR7. A gap of 50 years seems to imply MNR7 is well beyond the borders of the Federation. In the episode where no man has gone before, we discover James T. Kirk, well, R. Kirk, T. Kirk, was born in 2228. And so, with profound sadness, we come to an end of my part 3 of my Star Trek TOS timeline, in this case covering everything from 2000 AD to 2228 AD. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.